Today's lesson is very possibly the longest title we have ever encountered, Predicting the Gap Between Terms in a Pattern, and this will cover pages 94 to 96. For question 1, they are going to give you a few different pieces. They will start by giving you a rule, and then you will use this rule to fill out your input and output chart, fill in the gaps, and then record what the gap is. So, if our rule is multiply by 5 and add 4, then to figure out our input is 1, we need to multiply it by 5, so that's 5, and then add 4, so that gives us 9. So that's how we figure out our input for the first question. Then we need to do the same thing. We take our input and we follow our rule. Multiply by 5, so 2 times 5 is 10, and then we add 4. So that gives us 14. Now for our third one, here's our input. We multiply by 5, so that gives us 15, and we add 4, and that gives us 19. So as we look, to get from 9 to 14, we would need to add 5. And to get from 14 to 19, we would add 5. So our gap is add 5 or plus 5, because remember you could have a negative gap, so then you would need to put negative 5 or subtract 5. After you finish 4 of these tables, there will be another question at the end, part E, that asks you to compare the gap in each pattern above to the rule for the pattern. And what do you notice? So if our gap is 5, basically where do you see that number in the rule? So you'll be seeing, as you compare, whether there is a connection between, is it the multiplying or is it the adding that tells you what the gap is going to be. So I'll let you fill that out to see if you can come to that conclusion, but we gave you a hint for that yesterday as well. Question 2 has their directions kind of all over the place, so I've tried to break them down into 3 simple steps. So the first one, they'll give you a figure, is first step, make a t-table, see if you can predict the gap before you fill in the chart, and then write a formula. So here are a sequence of 3 figures, and then I've started by giving the same layout that they did for the t-table. So you have your figure number and your total number of blocks. So this doesn't say shaded or unshaded, it's just the total, so we're putting all of them. So if you look at figure 1, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 blocks. And if we look at figure 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And figure 3 has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we could go through and just write in that our gaps are plus 2, but you'll also notice that however many shaded boxes we have in the first example, it usually always doubles for the next one, and then it triples for the last one. So the number of shaded in the original is actually usually how many it goes up by each time, or is our gap. So when you're looking to see if you could predict the gap before you fill it in, you could just look at how many shaded blocks there are in the first figure, and that will probably see if that gives you a connection to the number of gaps. Now to write our formula, I'll give you a little bit of a structure here. Our gap is what we're going to multiply. So it'll be our gap times our variable plus the unshaded blocks. Okay? So if our gap is 2, and our variable could be any number. So we could do it, if we're doing it times the figure number, we could do f plus, and how many unshaded blocks did we have at the beginning? 2. And then I'll just go in with a different color. If you want to double check if this is correct, you could go, okay, 2 times 1, we've got 2 times the figure number plus 2. So 2, our first figure number is 1 plus 2 equals 2 plus 2 is 4. So that works for the first row. We could start with our formula again. This time we're doing the figure number for 2. So 2 times 2 is 4, plus 2 is 6. That works for the second row. And we could check for our third one as well. 2 times 3 plus 2 is 6, plus 2 is 8. So that works for all 3 rows. So that is our correct formula, but this gives you basically the framework to make any formula. Your gap times your variable plus the number of unshaded blocks. Question number 3 has a very specific layout, and it covers 4 main steps in the gray section above it on your page, so you can use that to help you review as well. But we're trying to come up with a rule based on our table. So we actually are adding a second column in the middle. So step 1 is to find the gap between terms. So we're just looking at this term column here. So that's what they've given us these circles for, is to go, okay, so to get from 5 to 8, we need to add 3. To get from 8 to 11, we need to add 3. So step 1, find the gap. Step 2 is to multiply the term number, so that's this column here, and we can replace our term number with n, that's a variable that we'll use, by the gap. So our gap is 3. So we would go 1 times 3 is 3. 2 times our gap is 2 times 3 is 6. And our third term, 3 times our gap, 3 is 9. So that's how you would fill in the next part of the chart. So step 3 asks, what do you need to add or subtract to get from the second column, so this is the second column, columns go up and down, to the third column. Now, I know it looks a little bit confusing in your book having this add right above the multiply then add, so I just wanted to make it clear that this is connected. When you fill in this blank here, you're filling out what do you need to add to get from this column to this column. So what they're asking is, what do you need to do to get from 3 to 5? Well, you need to add 2. And they've already said add, so you can just write 2. What do you do to get from 6 to 8? You add 2. 9 to 11, you add 2. So that's what this little thing on the bottom here means. The final step is to write the rule. So they have already given you a format for writing the rule, and so you just need to follow it. So when you multiply by, you always multiply by the gap, which is the number in the circle. So we would multiply by 3, and then when you add, you're going to write the number that you put just below that arrow. You add 2. Okay, so the gap is what you multiply, the number by the arrow is what you add. Some of these will switch out add for subtract, and then it'll also switch that out in the bottom, but it's still the same steps. It's just that you might have a bigger number and it might be switched. You had maybe like 12 and then you're going down to 11, so you would subtract 1. Okay. Question number 4 is going to have things set up in 2 different parts. So there'll be the first 6 examples, A through F. They will give you the chart, and then G through L, they will just give you a sequence. So I'm going to do one example where the chart is given to you and another example where you are creating your own chart from the sequence. So your first step is to find the gap. So we look and go, how do you get from 2 to 7? Well, you add 5. How do you get from 7 to 12? You add 5, and 12 to 17, you add 5. So at this point, we already know that our formula is going to start with our gap number times our term number. So that's just what this means. The gap times the term number. You see in the chart here, they've put a bracket in to tell you that's what you're putting into your formula. Now we need to figure out our n times the gap. So this formula isn't finished, but this is the first step. So we'd go, okay, 1 is our first n. 1 times our gap of 5 is 5. 2 times 5 is 10. 3 times 5 is 15. And 4 times 5 is 20. Now our last bit of the formula is figuring out how do we get from the n times gap column to the term column. So I'm going to just do it in different colors so you can see the steps. 5 minus 3 is 2. 10 minus 3 is 7. 15 minus 3 is 12. 20 minus 3 is 17. So this is what we put on the end. It's whatever you have to add or subtract to get from column 2 to column 3. Okay? So this number just goes right in there. Now, if they just give you a sequence of numbers, you need to write the entire chart on your own. So the first section is term number, or n. Then we have n times our gap, and finally our term. So they have given us, these are the terms. Okay, these are not the term numbers, these are the terms. So you could fill these in under the term column. Okay, and then I can separate those with lines so they're easier to navigate. And then our term number is just first, second, third, fourth. So the first term is 1, the second term is 2, the third term is 3, the fourth term is 4. So you're just writing what order they come in. Okay? Now, we'll need a space to put our rule. I guess I could have made all of this blue to show you that it's all the work that we're doing, but I think you guys will understand. So now I need to find the gap. So 54 plus 2 is 56. 56 plus 2 is 58. And 58 plus 2 is 60. So my formula, oh, this is a formula, not a rule, is going to start with 2n. Okay? So now I'm going to figure out n times the gap. So my first n is 1. So 1 times my gap is 2 is 2. 2 times 2 is 4. 3 times 2 is 6. 4 times 2 is 8. Okay? Now we have to figure out how to get from the second column to the third column. So 2 plus 52 is 54. 4 plus 52 is 56. 6 plus 52 is 58, and 8 plus 52 is 60. So the second part of our formula is that we also need to add 52. Okay, so that's how you would take a sequence, put it into the chart, and then come up with your formula, 2n plus 52. For question number 5, I'm not going to do the whole thing for you, but I will help you set up the question. So they're going to give you a sequence of figures that are basically little houses made out of toothpicks. So you're going to want to make basically the same kind of chart that we've been making. So you will want your term number, which is n. You will want n times your gap, and you will want your term. So they will give you 4 figures. I've just drawn 3 of them. So you have figures 1, 2, and 3, and you're counting how many toothpicks there are. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in the first figure. Then in the second figure, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So you put 11 here. And in the last figure, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So remember that your first step will be to figure out what are these terms going up by. So what is your gap? And then you will go through and go, okay, 1 times your gap is this, 2 times your gap is that, 3 times your gap is this. And so then it'll be your gap times n, right? I could put times in there so that it makes sense. And then you will need to either add or subtract whatever you need to get from the n gap column to the term column. Okay, so it's basically using the same thing, but you're filling in the numbers for your chart a little bit differently. And so then once you have a formula to figure out the 30th figure, you're going to change n into 30. So this is not the correct formula. I'm going to put it in red, but say you had something like 2n plus 7 to find the 30th one. You would go 2 times 30 plus 7 is 60 plus 7 is 67. Okay, so you're just changing n for 30 to find the 30th term. So, as always, there'll be a Google form attached to this assignment. Fill out the questions, hit submit and mark as done, and remember that you can ask for help in the comments if you need it.